The World Championship match has now concluded with Gukesh as the victor, but what we're going to look at today is the full story of this tremendous 14-game match. From here, I'm going to take you through each of the climactic moments from every single games 1 to 14. Some of the games were a lot more tame than others. Game number 1 certainly was not. So I'm going to let you in on the critical moments just starting off this match. Round number 1 saw Ding advancing into the white position, even though there was a big time disparity as Ding had spent a significant amount of time pushing this A pawn down the board. It turned out to be worthwhile as he gained the advantage, slowly encroaching forward further and further into the position, planting his pony deep into the B2 square, from which he continues moving forward into the white position, baiting white forward with potential f5 pawn pushes so that he can then get new avenues for his pieces to attack. Even though there was some back and forth and some pretty complicated tactics here, Ding managed to hold his nerves, which was surprising considering his recent form hasn't been great. But he really came to show that this World Championship match, he was serious and he was not going to be a walk in the park. He starts pushing back all of the white pieces here. If there's a capture, this pawn is loose. So there is big trouble for Gukesh. Round number 1, he's very shaken here. Only has 3 moves. He only has 24 seconds to make 3 moves, desperately making them on the board. Just Ding continuing to press, infiltrating, and this A pawn that he spent so long thinking about pushing up the board now looks like it could make all the difference with A2 dropping off the board. He gives a check, collects the pawn. One last little trick here with the move bishop to e6 if you were to go king h7, queen to e4, and bishop a2. So this does show Gukesh's very strong resilience for the entire match, which is a common theme throughout. But Ding, accurate to the end in this first game, plays king to h8, and Gukesh resigns because moves like queen g2 and a2 a1 queen are unstoppable. Even just queen b2, keeping it simple, guarding the g7 pawn and promoting, and the game would be over. So let's take a look at how game number 2 goes down. Game number 2 was a fairly uneventful and peaceful draw. The players exchanged off all of their bishops. Ding stabilized his position, played this interesting move rook to c1, trying to keep more pieces on the board to pressure, but really nothing much came of it. He started moving back and forth with the knights, and the players quickly made a threefold repetition draw. However, this peaceful atmosphere doesn't last for long. Game number 3, Gukesh switches it up from his usual pawn to e4 and instead goes for pawn to d4, leading to an incredibly dynamic and chaotic position. He launches his pawn into e4 now, locking in the bishop from escaping. And after the capture, and knight to e6, it looks like Ding is getting nice counterplay, which will also defend the bishop. Gukesh doesn't care. He tosses the pawn, attacking the bishop anyway. Ding jumps his knight into the center, but now bishop to f2, trying to remove the guard of the bishop so that the bishop can be captured. And while it looks like you can defend with the move bishop to g7, guarding your knight here, and if you take and then I take back, I will in fact hit your rook. But Gukesh with the lovely move, knight to e2, overworking this knight and saying that if your knight wants to capture me, I'll take with the bishop and hit your rook instead. So Ding has to give up the bishop over here, which he does. And after all said and done, Gukesh converts excellently here, just inching forward, making the right moves, consolidating, defending his pawns, offering the trades at the right time, and afterwards Ding captures this pawn over here. He only has 9 seconds to make time control in 6 moves. It's really not going to happen. Bishop to h3, lovely move here. If the rook goes to e7 or d8, there's a skewer, and the rook has nowhere else to go. So of course, pawn to f5, Gukesh plays bishop to f4, clinical to the last second, and rook to h5, I think, barely makes it on the board. Ding flags as the move is played, but the move bishop to f5 would have sealed the deal in a very nice way. This rook is under fire, the g6 pawn is threatened, and this bishop is overloaded. Complete mess here. If you were to take the rook, then you can take this rook with check and then collect the h1 rook. That would be game over. The match is now equalized, and let's take a look at what happens from here. Game 4, a relatively peaceful draw. Ding tries to neutralize here to recover from the loss that just happened. The pieces all get traded off, and the players shortly agree to a draw. Game number 5, however, Gukesh was on the ropes. Once again, he'd taken considerable risk pushing his g-pawn into Ding's position, and Ding had a golden opportunity to try and put his pony on the side of the board, pressuring these dark squared pawns that Gukesh has. However, he instead decides to exchange the knights on c4, which Gukesh quickly goes for, trying to consolidate into this opposite colored bishop endgame. And after the rook moves to d4 very cleverly, because if you were to capture here, then the pawn would in fact run after the rook goes to d8, and the queen would be unstoppable. But Gukesh maintains his composure, manages to hold Ding down, and Ding even trades into a pawn down endgame, which is very weird, going from a pawn up endgame, which he could have had and oppressed pretty straightforwardly, to a pawn down endgame where he can hold with a fortress. It's pretty clear that Ding is still trying to recover mentally from letting that game slip, maybe, or maybe he is just not fully there, trying to make sure that he doesn't take any risk, although his decision not to play the move knight to a4 here is pretty widely regarded. I think Magnus was saying this was a big missed opportunity from Ding. Hikaru as well. A lot of the top players pretty confused about why Ding didn't go for this knight a4 move, but nevertheless, the score remains drawn up. Game number 6 stems out of a London system, so you might expect it to be a relatively tame draw, but that was not the case. Gukesh is in fact offered a draw by Ding Liren. The threefold repetition, however, was declined. Gukesh tries to play for the win in this very chaotic position, which is quite an interesting decision here. He takes an absurd amount of risk and transforms the structure into this connect 4 versus Ding's 2 pawns on the king side, which look like if they could get rolling, it could be very dangerous for Gukesh. Ding instead tries to break up the black position with his h-pawn, which Gukesh just accepts, grabs the pawn, and says, I don't care that you're getting to my pawn over here because I want to use my h-pawn to run down the board. And here is where we see Gukesh's style of chess really in full display. Super concrete, taking everything one step at a time, accurate calculation. He doesn't care about making the anti-positional move as long as it is a good move. So Ding tries to go for the pawn, but now Gukesh, just in time, delivers a check, moves his king up the board, and says, I'm going to get my king very active and maybe even promote my e-pawn. So Ding has to bail out here. He starts delivering a check, and the two players make an exciting threefold repetition, which really shows the two styles at conflict. Gukesh, very accurate calculator, but Ding maybe a little bit more experience in these positional decisions. After all, he has got one world championship match under his belt already. Game number 7, Gukesh had gotten his perfect position with the white pieces. A nice stable advantage, a passed pawn, and the 2 bishops. So, the engine said that Gukesh had a huge opportunity here to potentially play bishop to e3 and bishop d2, although this is quite an unclear move. As the trade of queens, who does that benefit? It's not really sure, and this a pawn was going to drop off apparently if you played bishop to e3, takes, and then move the bishop back to e3. This pawn was supposed to drop off at some point. However, Gukesh instead goes for the more active move queen to f4, and after the exchange, he trades off all of the pieces, quickly removing the queens from the board, thinking that this endgame he has excellent chances after rook to c5, and he goes to collect this pawn. He does in fact take the pawn, but after the knight goes into the center, now Ding has this tricky little move, knight to c6, attacking the rook and also attacking the pawn. If you move the rook back to c4, Ding will simply repeat moves and ask you to look for something better. Ding manages to activate his king deeper into the position, holding it together with immense tenacity. He drives his pieces further forward, right? And after this exchange of pawns, what's amazing is that this f6 pawn is sheltering the black king, and maybe it's even black who's going to start pushing forward with such activity against the passive white position. Eventually, the h-pawn drops off the board, and Gukesh pushes forward his f-pawn in resignation of the draw. This pawn drops off the board. Gukesh decides there's nothing more to play for. Ding agrees, and the players end with a draw as the bishop is insufficient checkmating material for the white pieces. So game number 7, another draw, though not peaceful whatsoever. It was extremely eventful. Game number 8, Gukesh has played flawlessly to gain a small advantage out of the position so far. But all of it begins to turn around in just a couple moves. One mistake from Gukesh, blocking with the wrong knight, followed by another mistake, attacking the queen, allowing this queen e1, queen to f2 remaneuvering to put significant pressure on the c file. And finally, bishop to e6, a bit of a slow move here. You had to start motoring this a-pawn down the board. And from here, Ding has gained the advantage. Gukesh found himself sacrificing the exchange in desperation to keep the position together. And Ding looked like he was just going to improve his way slowly to victory. But after here, a repetition was in fact offered by Ding, rather than trying to play for the win with something like queen to e3, where you can attempt to advance these pawns, maybe knock these pawns off the board. This would require some sacrifices, which looked a little bit risky, but Gukesh, in fact, declines the repetition here. Incredibly bold decision. He plays queen to a2, taking significant risk, and after rook to c2, the queen drops back, a check, and he drops one of his pawns from the board. So what is Gukesh doing? Well, he's going all in on this b3 pawn. He wants to promote the b3 pawn and also stir up counterplay on this weak king, which is now in the center of the board. And that's exactly what happens. The king was about to come under significant fire with moves like bishop to h5 and the knight potentially partaking in the attack as well. So Ding decides, okay, I've had enough. It's time to exchange the queens off the board, and ends up in this drawn endgame here with a nice little fork. This had to be played. If you didn't go for bishop to a2, Gukesh would just be much worse. So the game does end in a draw after this exchange here. Opposite colored bishops and nothing more to play for. Round 9 was a perfectly played game from the two players, taking the position to a drawn endgame into a drawn rook endgame, from which the players just traded off all of the pawns, and it was an outside h-pawn for black, nowhere near sufficient to play for the win, and the players made a draw. Ding letting go of his h-pawn because he is not interested in playing to the stalemate. Round number 10, arising from a London system, marks the last peaceful draw that we will see in this match. Rounds 11 to 14, as you are about to see, will be total chaos, but for now, the players agree to yet another draw. Game 11 puts us in an incredibly imbalanced position where Ding has potential to take a lot of space in the center, but at the same time is saddled with this incredibly weak queenside. Gukesh starts an interesting knight maneuver, looking to get his pony more optimized. But after Ding curls up, he continues the journey with the pony, and he's just going to stack his rooks and apply considerable pressure to this b7 pawn. Ding tries to turtle up, but even e6 was the first of many mistakes to come. He had to try and play the move rook to d6, which is very hard to see, instead of playing pawn e6 and moving the rook to e7, which does look like a natural plan. So the knight jumps into c5, Ding tries to defend, and after rook goes to the b file and this pawn is under lots of pressure, you have to try and play the knight to b4 to block the two rooks, but this doesn't happen. Instead, we see an unprecedented mistake for a world championship match, simply blundering a piece with the move queen to c8. The queen can just take the knight here, and if the queen were to take, then the bishop would take, and the pawn would take, and you would drop the rook. And if you take with the pawn after queen takes, then rook takes rook, and the queen is lost to the pin to the king. So that's exactly what happens. Ding resigns, and Gukesh is given a golden opportunity to bring this one home with just a couple more draws. But Ding is not discouraged. Starting from a mistake from Gukesh, Ding claims the advantage, knight to f4, driving his pieces deeper into black's camp. And if you were to capture this knight here, the bishop will take back, putting tremendous pressure on this c7 pawn. But if you don't take the knight, then pawn to c5 is coming almost no matter what, kicking the knight into the center, from which an exchange will happen, and the c7 pawn will drop with a fork anyway. So you have to take the knight, the knight here, and now Ding, bishop pair, big advantage, lots of pressure, doesn't let go. He pushes Gukesh back further and further, advancing his pieces in. Once again, a knight driving itself into the 7th rank. Big callbacks to game number 1, where Ding had his knight on the b2 square, wreaking havoc. And here, the pawns are dropping. The game simply cannot be held. Ding, once again, driving further and further into the black position. Absolutely clinical. Now the threat of rook to e8 is pretty much unstoppable. f6 gets played, and the fantastic rook takes g7 with a checkmate to follow. After king takes, there'll be bishop takes, and if king takes, you will promote to a queen. Ding strikes back, and now we enter round number 13 with, once again, an equal score. Round number 13, Gukesh misses a huge chance here with, after queen to c5, rook to e1, and queen to f7. He should have exchanged rooks first and then put his knight on e4 and to d6. As in that position, after knight to e4, the expected move would be queen to d8, and after knight to d6, rook c7. Check, you have to go king f8, otherwise there's knight f7, and then rook goes to e1, rook e7, and then you've got this very nice move, rook to e4, which is incredibly difficult to see. If you take the rook, there is a checkmate, and if the move like g5 gets played, you have h4, takes, and even rook to e5. Going after the black king, you still cannot take. This, however, I'm not sure if it was even missed by Gukesh or just underestimated. He plays knight to e4 very quickly here, going for this knight to d6, but Ding finds the only move, rook to f8, and then goes on to hold this game down to a draw, just barely holding on, but he does get the job done, taking things to an equal match score for game number 14. So, game number 14, where this video began and where it will end, we had Gukesh pushing the black side of a very unpleasant looking endgame for white. He prevents the exchange of bishops from coming off the board because you want to keep rook and bishop to maximize your chances. Gukesh has been given one last opportunity before tie breaks occur to try and take the title here and now. So he starts to expand forward with this nice plan of moving his king and pawns up the board, and Ding makes this quick exchange here. But Gukesh is not done pressing. He starts to encroach with his pieces, repeats, tests the waters. He's poking, he's prodding, he's advancing his rook to attack the bishop. And here, Ding makes what may possibly be his fatal decision. He puts the bishop in the corner, and the bishop now has no squares either side. It can only be on this diagonal. We'll see how this is critical in just a few moves. Gukesh brings his king back to f6, and Ding now comes up with this plan of playing rook to f4, rook to f2. He wants to exchange the rooks, and then the bishop endgame will be a draw, but it is just not to be. Gukesh brings his king to the center, and after rook to f2, everybody is in shock. You guys have already seen the aftermath of this in the opening sequence of the video. The rook gets traded off. Gukesh puts his bishop in the center. One more exchange. King goes to the middle. Gukesh cleans it up. King to e5, and Ding resigns. The reason Ding resigns is because if the king goes to the left anywhere, pawn to f4 will come, and there's no way to get back in time. The red carpet is unveiled, and the pawn will promote. Equally, if the king tries to go to f2, then you will step to the side, diagonal opposition, and then gain full opposition, followed by shouldering the white king out the position and claiming the win with 2 extra pawns. So that about sums up the World Championship match. Gukesh takes victory over Ding in an absolutely breathtaking final game. Really good grinding skills from Gukesh, and heartbreaking loss for Ding. He was so close to holding all the way to tiebreaks. Looking to the future, though, it is interesting. Will Magnus Carlsen come back from retirement, seeing new blood in the World Championship position? I don't know. We'll have to see in the future coming days, weeks, and months. But other than all of that, if you did enjoy this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. And as always, I'll see all of you in another one. Bye.